I walked into my son's backyard and heard, "Why is she even still alive?" Little did they know what I had hidden in my will. I used to think turning 75 would be peaceful, but it turned out to be a trap. My son, the boy I raised with every breath of my life, called me to a luxury apartment in the city. He said it was a surprise gift for my birthday. I was moved to tears, but not even an hour later, the moment I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me, and I knew that apartment was never meant for me. Have you ever been deceived by your own family with a gift? I have, and that was the day I understood. When a mother has nothing left to give, she begins to feel like a burden in the eyes of the very children she once raised. Stay with me, and I'll tell you what happened behind that door, and why, in the end, I no longer needed anyone to open it for me. My name is Gloria Matheson. I'm 75 years old, and if you're listening to me now, maybe you've been where I was, silent, thinking that silence was love, giving everything, hoping someone would understand. I used to be the kind of mother who never complained. The grandmother who showed up to every graduation, every birthday party, every late night when my grandchild had a slight fever and my daughter-in-law couldn't get out of bed. I used to believe if I just tried hard enough, my children would one day see their mother's worth. But I was wrong. Some lessons, if you don't stop for yourself, life will stop you with the hardest fall. I tell this story, not to seek pity and not to place blame. I tell it for those living too quietly in their own families, for the women who've made a habit of putting everyone else first, just to remind them, if you keep stepping back, one day, no one will remember where you ever stood. And maybe if I hadn't picked up that call from my son saying, "Mom, this year for your birthday, I've got a surprise for you," I might never have woken up from the dream I'd wrapped around myself, a dream of gratitude that never really existed. So now, let me tell you, step by step, how a birthday gift turned into a trap, how I, a mother who thought she had disappeared, stood up one last time to reclaim herself. And it all began with one fateful dinner. My son threw wine in my face when I refused to pay the bill at a fancy restaurant. There was no warning, no harsh words, just a flick of the wrist, and the red wine splashed onto my face like cold February rain. It slid down my cheek and onto the silk scarf I'd kept since the 80s. They say a slap can kill your pride. But that glass of wine didn't kill me. It woke me up. That dinner was for his wife's birthday, a private table at the most expensive place in East End, the kind of place where candles are tucked into glass jars like treasures, and the menu has no prices. I came because he insisted. "You just need to be there, Mom. You don't have to worry about anything," he told me 3 days earlier. I should have known the moment I stepped inside. No one stood up to greet me. No hugs. No smiles. Jenna, my daughter-in-law, looked me up and down like I was a coffee stain on a silk chair. Everything was already on the table. Flutes of champagne, a 5-course menu, and an air that made it clear I didn't belong. I ordered only water and a small salad. I've never been one to spend recklessly, especially since I retired. My pension covers the basics, enough to get by, but not more. I'd spent my whole life for my son, and frugality had become second nature. Jenna ordered lamb. There was baked lobster, 3 bottles of wine described by the waiter with strange words like vintage and a smoky finish on the back of the throat. When the check came, Ethan pushed it toward me. "You have your card, right? They're waiting." I thought he was joking. I gave a soft laugh, waiting for him to take it back. But he didn't laugh. "Are you kidding? This isn't a game. Please don't embarrass me in front of everyone." His words were sharp, cold, and deliberate, like needles. I looked around the table. No one said a word. Eyes darted away. I heard the faint clink of forks on plates. Someone laughing softly at the next table. Not a single person stood with me. I shook my head gently. I didn't bring enough, and I never agreed to pay for this. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't tremble. Just a quiet note of exhaustion. I'd paid for birthdays, anniversaries, even for the things Jenna accidentally overspent on, and always covered it with my retirement money. But this time felt different. Something in me paused. I was learning to say no. Then the wine flew. Part of it was Ethan's shaking hand. The rest was a cruelty long hidden, now laid bare. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply closed my eyes as the wine soaked my collar. No one at the table stood up. No apology came. Jenna turned her face away, and I saw her lips curl into a smile. I stood. The heavy wooden chair scraped the floor with a piercing screech. I wiped my face with the napkin, once pure white, now stained crimson. I didn't look back at my son. I didn't need to. I walked out in silence, my heels echoing against the marble floors. The wind outside was cold, but not colder than I felt inside. I walked home. Every step felt like I was leaving behind a play I no longer wished to perform. Streetlights flickered. I stopped at a corner store, bought a box of tissues and a bottle of face wash. The woman behind the counter gave me a look of concern when she saw the blotches on my blouse. "I'm fine," I said, though no one had asked. I got home just past 10, sat on my old sofa, and looked in the mirror. Mirrors don't lie. I saw a 75-year-old woman. Eyes once filled with hope, now hollowed. I thought of every time Ethan asked me for money. Every time Jenna said I was behind the times. Every time I stayed silent, because I thought that was love. But it wasn't. Love doesn't humiliate. Love doesn't come with public disgrace. That night, I opened my journal. For the first time in years, I didn't write much, just one sentence. I don't deserve to be treated like this. And I knew, tomorrow, I'd start doing something different. I sat motionless at the edge of my bed. The scarf had been washed and hung to dry over the chair, but the smell of wine still lingered at the collar. That scent wasn't just aged grapes, it was shame. It was the smell of something breaking inside a mother. I didn't sleep. My eyes stayed open, staring at the ceiling. I kept wondering, had I been too soft? Had I loved him the wrong way? They say loving your child means never expecting anything in return. But if love leads to contempt, then what is it? I thought about all the times before. That night, Jenna lost her keys and called me at 1 a.m. I drove 40 minutes in the rain just to let her in. I remembered Ethan's birthday last year, how I baked his favorite butter cake from when he was a boy, then waited 2 hours in their kitchen, only for Jenna to say, "Just leave it, we ordered one already." I'd gotten used to enduring, to nodding, to pulling out my checkbook whenever they said they were short. I never asked what for, maybe because I'd once been the one who borrowed. When Ethan was small, I took loans from friends to pay for his school. I sold my wedding ring, just to afford treatment for his father, even when the doctor said it was too late. I did it all because I believed, someday, when Ethan was grown, he'd understand. He'd protect me the way I once protected him. But he didn't. He threw wine in my face. I remember the couple at the next table. The woman looked at me with pity. The man leaned in and whispered something to her. I felt exposed, standing on a stage, no costume, no dignity, no one to defend me. I felt ashamed. I used to teach literature for 34 years. I once stood before classrooms filled with students, received thanks from parents whose children I inspired to love words. but just one glass of wine, and I felt worthless. And yet, strangely, that very moment is what woke me up. I no longer wanted to be the silent backbone of a family that looked down on me. That night, I wrote again in my journal, for the first time in years. Just one line. I don't deserve to be treated like this. And I knew tomorrow I'd begin to do something different. I only meant to step out back and water the rosemary. But that voice, it froze my blood. I did this every morning, not because the plants were desperate for water, but because I needed an excuse to step outside the suffocating walls of this house. A place that once felt like home, but now felt more like a waiting room. I hadn't slept the night before. The words, the looks from the restaurant still haunted me. But beneath all of that was the sting of a truth I could no longer ignore. I carried my silver watering can and stepped into the backyard. A thin layer of snow still blanketed the ground. Morning light hit the frost like glitter on mourning cloth. Each breath came out in a soft puff of white. The patio table was still laced with dew. The little lavender pot sat near the fence, the rosemary just beside it, still holding on, stubborn in the dead of winter. I lifted one small branch, gently, like brushing the hair of a forgotten child. I sat down on the folding wooden chair pressed against the outer wall. The watering can rested by my foot as I waited for my hands to warm. That's when I heard Brittany's voice, coming from the porch. I swear, if I have to keep living with her like this, I'm going to lose my mind. I looked up. My face didn't move, but my heart pounded so hard, my hand gripped my wrist to steady it. Her voice carried. She must have been on the phone, close to the porch, not seeing me tucked behind the planters. Yeah, she just sits there all day in silence, then wanders the house like a ghost at night. Kevin says I should be gentle, but seriously, try living like this. It's unbearable. A chill ran down my spine. Brittany used to be a sweet, cheerful girl. I thought she cared about me, at least enough to keep a basic level of respect. Before I could stand, Kevin's voice broke in. I heard the sliding door creak. He must have stepped outside. I don't know what to do. She's not the same anymore, he said, quiet but clear, like a confession he'd held for too long. I turned my face to the wooden wall. The cold seeped into my shoulders, but it wasn't as cold as what I'd just heard. Footsteps crunched in the snow. Maisie. I heard her pass by, her voice slicing clean through me. We don't even invite friends over anymore because of her. I didn't move. I didn't cry. Maybe my body had paused every emotion to protect itself. I sat there, frozen. Every cell in me repeated just one thing. This is my family. This is my son. This is my granddaughter. I stayed there for a long time, hands still resting on the cold watering can. The sun grew brighter, but the light felt pale, empty, incapable of warming anything in me. Their voices still echoed like they came from a deep well, distant, yet impossible to ignore. I stood slowly, careful not to make a sound. My heartbeat stumbled, as if it hadn't caught up to what had just happened. I stepped past the lavender, careful not to crunch the snow beneath my feet. In my head, everything played in reverse. The nights I stayed up sewing Kevin's shirts when he was 10. The times I watched over Brittany after she gave birth, still shaking while making bottles. The bedtime stories I read to Maisie, her little body curled beside me, eyes shining like stars. If she just died before Christmas, I'd take it as a gift from Santa. That sentence didn't slip out. Brittany didn't whisper. She said it clearly, deliberately, without hesitation, which meant it had lived in her mind long before she said it aloud. I walked around to the back door, eased it open, and stepped into the kitchen. No one knew I'd been outside. They were still scattered somewhere in the house. Brittany, maybe upstairs. Kevin in the garage. Maisie. I didn't know. I placed the watering can on the sink. My hand still smelled of mint and rosemary. It used to bring me peace. Now it just felt hollow. I looked at the wall clock. Nearly 9 a.m. Not early, not late. Enough for a household to begin their day, but I didn't want to begin anything anymore. I poured myself a glass of water, didn't drink it, just stood there, staring out the window, where sunlight touched the snow-covered lawn. That's when I heard Brittany again, this time, inside. She was still on the phone. Her voice was lower, but not low enough. No, my mother-in-law still won't say a word. She knows we're uncomfortable, but she keeps pretending she doesn't. I clenched the glass, then released it before it shattered. My feet carried me back to my downstairs bedroom. I shut the door, then sat on the edge of the bed. Everything in that room was neatly placed. A small bookshelf, a family photo, the old wooden dresser I brought from the house before. Above me, the ceiling. Outside, I could hear the snow beginning to fall again, soft taps like someone sprinkling forgetfulness over the roof. I sat there until noon. No one knocked. No one asked if I wanted lunch. Maybe they thought I was sleeping. Maybe they didn't care. I only knew that night I wouldn't sleep. I lay on the bed all afternoon. I didn't turn on the lights. As evening came, the room filled with that dull gray hue of winter. Street lights cast soft streaks across the ceiling like spilled ink. Laughter floated from upstairs. Brittany, Kevin, and Maisie must have been having dinner. I didn't go up. No one called for me. They were used to me excusing myself when they needed space. But tonight, I couldn't close my eyes. I turned on the bedside lamp, pulled the blanket over my knees, and stared at the ceiling. I knew every tiny crack, every shadow between the panels. Outside, the snow continued to fall, little flecks tapping against the window like whispers that wouldn't end. Brittany's words echoed again in my head. Not once, but dozens of times, louder than when she first said them. If she died before Christmas, I take it as a gift from Santa. No laughter, no hint of a joke, just the relief in her voice, like my death would be a release. I didn't cry. Strangely, I couldn't cry anymore. My feelings weren't soft like water. They'd hardened into stone. I felt myself fading in silence. I didn't understand. What had I done to make them see my presence as a burden? Had I lived too long? Stayed too quiet? Loved the wrong way? I turned toward the window. Under the porch light, I saw footprints in the snow. Maybe Kevin's, maybe Maisie's, taking out the trash. But to me, they looked like the traces of someone who had stepped out of my life, leaving only wreckage behind. I thought about time, about the years with my husband, back when Kevin was still a boy, when Brittany was still shy about coming over. Back then, I was mom. I was the one who held things together. Now, I was just a leftover piece in a play that had rewritten its cast. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to focus. I thought about everything I'd heard, every word, every pause, and I realized something. They thought I didn't know, and that realization lit something inside me. If they'd known I heard, they would have changed their tune. They would have made excuses, or at least pretended to be kind. But they didn't know. They didn't know I was behind the lavender. They didn't know I heard every syllable. From Brittany, from Kevin, from Maisie. And most of all, they didn't know I had secrets too. I turned and sat up. My hand reached for the bedside drawer. I pulled out a small wooden box, one I'd never shown anyone, not even Kevin. I didn't open it that night, but I set it in front of me as a reminder. If they thought I was weak, they'd soon realize how wrong they were. And the only place for me to begin again, the only space where I could still be entirely myself, was the basement no one in this house had stepped into in over a decade. There's a room in the basement that no one in this house has stepped into for over 10 years, except me. The basement is a place no one wants to visit. Maybe it's the dampness, or the smell of old dust clinging to the brick walls, or maybe it's the way it reminds people of days they'd rather forget. But to me, it's the only place in this house that still holds my truth. Every night, after the upstairs laughter and conversation fade, I quietly descend the creaking wooden steps, each one echoing like the sigh of an old soul. No one knows I come down here. They think I spend my time tending plants or reading old books in my room. They don't realize that, while they're upstairs debating which retirement home I should go to, I'm down here, rereading letters, opening my old laptop, and rewriting every plan. I flick on the small yellow lamp in the far corner. Its dim light spills across the old wooden desk I've used since 1984, a gift from my husband, Raymond, back when he was a foreman at the local mill. The leather chair lets out a soft creak as I sit, pulling a thin wool shawl around my shoulders. On the desk sits a small walnut box. The lid bears a simple carving, done by Raymond's hand one Christmas long ago. I open it, inhaling the faint scent of aged wood. Inside, a notebook labeled Plan B, a stack of old bank documents, 3 or 4 share certificates from a local food processing company we invested in more than 30 years ago, handwritten letters from Raymond during his final illness, and finally, a copy of our prenuptial agreement. I go through each document slowly, as if touching the younger version of myself. The woman I used to be, persuasive, savvy, careful with investments, despite never having gone to college. Raymond always said, "You're the foundation of this life. If I'm the roof, you're the ground that holds everything up." And he trusted me enough to make long-term investment plans, to set up private accounts, and, most importantly, to sign a prenup that gave me full control over my assets if he passed before me. No one in the family knows that. Not Brittany, not Kevin, certainly not Maisie. I remember the last time I opened this box. It was a year ago, after a bank statement showed a $4,000 charge for a massage chair, purchased by Brittany, on my card. I didn't confront her. I simply called the bank, moved important funds to a separate branch, and changed my access codes. Kevin once borrowed money as an advance, then forgot to repay it. I never brought it up, but I recorded every single charge. And tonight, I open everything again, not to reminisce, but to begin the counterattack. I take out the Plan B notebook, flipping through its now yellowed pages. My handwriting is still neat, deliberate, every step numbered. The first page reads, November 16th, 2007, the day Raymond died. The second page, start over. I remember that night. After the funeral, after the cold handshakes and hollow condolences, I sat here in this same basement, alone. Kevin had only been married to Brittany for a year, still naive about responsibility. I considered asking him to help with the estate paperwork, but decided against it. Raymond had once said, "Don't rely on anyone, not even your children. People love you, yes, but love doesn't always mean kindness." I wasn't angry at that. I just remembered it. That year, I began teaching myself financial literacy. I studied inheritance law, wills, shares, estate taxes. At first, none of it made sense, but I kept reading, and it slowly took root. This basement used to be where Raymond read the paper every evening, sipping bourbon on weekends. After he passed, I turned it into a small office. No one noticed. They thought I came down to dust. I plug in my old laptop. The charger light blinks a few times, then holds steady. The operating system is slow but functional. In the private folder, I store scans of financial records, transaction logs, and most recently, a draft of a new will. Brittany once asked me, half joking, half serious, "Do you plan on dividing the house later? We need to know if we can start renovations." I smiled. As long as I'm alive, I still get to live in this house. But truthfully, I'd already started planning the division, not because of her question, but because of the words she didn't know I heard in the backyard. I glanced through an old email, then opened a new message. The recipient, redacted. Legal service, U.S. A lawyer I once worked with 20 years ago at a local community center. Young, dedicated, discreet. Dear Nathaniel, this is Gloria. I'm not sure if you remember me. I'd like to review a will and get some private legal advice. Please keep this confidential from my family. I'm available next Tuesday afternoon if you are. Best regards, Gloria Matheson. I hit send and exhaled, long and slow. Somewhere behind me, the grandfather clock gave a low, heavy chime. It felt like even time itself was holding its breath. I pulled open a drawer and retrieved a folder, the asset division plan I drafted earlier this year. There was no Kevin, no Brittany. I scribbled in the margin, "Leave it to someone who never asked for anything." I sat still in the worn leather chair, its back hugging every ache I'd accumulated over the years. On my lap lay a frayed handkerchief, initials RM, stitched in silver thread. I pressed it to my cheek, as if to hear an old whisper. Raymond always said I was stronger than I knew. Maybe he was right. On the desk were 3 old wills I had once written and abandoned. Each one crafted in a moment when I thought I couldn't take any more. But I kept enduring, kept pretending, kept quiet. Not this time. I wasn't writing another draft. I was writing the final version. I turned on the desk lamp, pulled out a blank sheet of paper. My hand trembled slightly, but I kept writing. I, Gloria Matheson, being of sound mind and firm will, declare this to be my last will and testament. Line by line, the words formed. I left this house, the one they live in, mock me in, for a community education charity. The food company shares went to Margot, an old friend who helped me after Raymond's passing. And my savings? Half to the public library, half to Nathaniel, for handling what comes next. Not a cent to Kevin or Brittany. No explanations. They didn't need one. I signed it, set the pen down. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd grown a year younger, not older. I stood, took the will to the corner of the basement, and unlocked the small safe. Clack. Opened. I slid the new document between legal folders. Shut it. Turned the combination 3 times. In the mirror beside the cabinet, I saw my reflection. Deeper wrinkles after a harsh winter. But my eyes were sharp, dry, no longer dulled with tears. I whispered, to no one but myself, "Enough. They don't get to define me anymore. Not a bad mother, not a useless old woman, not a burden." I climbed the stairs and turned off the basement light. Before pushing open the kitchen door, I looked back once more, like I had just buried the last fragile part of myself down there. On the table, the wooden box sat ajar. In the dim light no one cared about, something glinted. Raymond's wedding ring. I'd never taken it off. Until tonight. They think they've erased me from their lives. But they're wrong. I'm just getting ready for my final act. And the grandest scene is yet to come. At the very party where I was never invited. I sat in the corner of the room, watching eyes pass over me as if I were a misplaced caterer at my own son's party. Soft cream-colored lighting bathed the tables, each draped in white silk. Silver-dusted faux pine branches shimmered among small candles. and tall crystal bowls brimmed with champagne. Expensive perfume floated in the air, mingling with the low hum of polite laughter. Everything was perfect, except for one thing. I didn't belong here. I arrived early, intentionally early. I'd changed outfits 3 times before settling on the navy velvet dress that still fit, with a white silk scarf Raymond gave me on my 60th. I wanted my son to see I had tried. I wanted to look like I was part of the evening, an event honoring the woman of the house, as the invitation Elena sent so proudly declared. The moment I stepped into the restaurant foyer, I saw the hesitation in the host's eyes. "Sorry, ma'am. Are you sure you're Gloria Matheson?" I nodded, handed over my invitation. He glanced at it, then scanned the guest list. After a full minute, he looked up and gave a tight smile. "Ah, yes. You're at table 17. Back left, near the kitchen. This way, please. Table 17. I walked past the beautifully arranged tables, place cards, fresh flowers, glowing candles. Mine had a plastic bouquet and 2 older guests I didn't recognize, whispering until I arrived. No one welcomed me. No one smiled. Across the room, I saw Elena directing servers, wearing a sparkling crimson dress, hair swept into a high bun, earrings twinkling like little stars. For a second, I thought she saw me, but then she turned away, laughing with another woman, her hand hooked through someone else's arm. I reached for a napkin to wipe the sweat from my palms, only to see it was printed with the words, "Elena and Wyatt's Legacy Night." My name wasn't there. A young waitress approached, eyeing me carefully. "Excuse me, are you with the catering service? Did you bring the food tray?" My mouth opened, but no sound came. Then quietly, I said, "I'm the groom's mother." The waitress flushed, mumbled an apology, and backed away quickly. I sat there, motionless, hoping if I stayed still long enough, the room might forget I was ever here, and maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have to witness what came next. An hour passed. Then Wyatt walked in, late, as always, dressed in a sleek black suit, burgundy tie, moving like the world owed him its attention. He didn't look my way, didn't wave, didn't smile. But when he took the mic, his voice filled the room. "Thank you all for coming tonight, to this special evening, where we honor the incredible woman who has supported, built, and sacrificed for this family." I held my breath. "Elena." Applause exploded. Elena bowed slightly, hand over heart like an actress accepting an Oscar. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. My eyes met those of an older woman at the next table. She looked at me like I was a misplaced staffer on the red carpet. I lowered my head. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. My chest tightened. But I didn't leave. Not yet. I rose slowly, walked toward the hallway that led to the restrooms. My low heels tapped softly on the polished stone floor. In the dim mirror, I saw myself. Velvet creased at the hip, cheeks flushed from champagne I hadn't even tasted. I locked the stall door, sat on the cold porcelain, trying to breathe. I didn't cry. Not yet. But my throat burned, like smoke curling inside my chest. I closed my eyes, breathed slowly, and then, who's that woman sitting in the corner? She looks like a retired maid. A voice outside, between the click-clack of heels. Another voice giggled. I thought she was staff too, until I saw her just sitting there like a statue. I didn't feel shame. I felt silence, emptiness. I used to believe if I just gave a little more, waited a little longer, things would fall into place. But no, they didn't need me, not anymore. I opened my purse, my fingers trembling, pulled out my phone. My hands were dry, cold. I typed slowly, "Jack, I need the house deed transferred solely into my name, as soon as possible. Call me tomorrow morning. Jack Dawson." Raymond's old lawyer. He helped us draft the prenup back in 1992 when Raymond started his poultry distribution business. After Raymond passed, Jack stayed in touch, not for business, but out of respect. I looked at the message, then hit send. And in that moment, I knew I was done waiting for an apology. I stepped out of the stall, washed my hands in water so cold it stung. I looked in the mirror and whispered, "Gloria Matheson, stand up. You know exactly what you're doing." I dried my hands, dabbed at the smudged lipstick with a napkin printed with someone else's name, threw it into the open trash bin. I returned to the banquet room through a side entrance, no longer crossing the center aisle. The tablecloth in front of me was still pristine, untouched. My dinner plate sat full, roast turkey with cranberry sauce, beside a glass of champagne still bubbling. But everything blurred under the crystal light, as if it all belonged to a show I was no longer cast in. I sat up straight, didn't eat, didn't speak. Elena's laughter rang out from the far end of the room, bright and sharp like shattered glass. She clung to Wyatt's arm, whispering something to a group in tuxedos. They laughed in unison. Elena stepped forward, microphone in hand. "We'd like to give our deepest thanks to the woman who has been the soul, the silent hand behind the warmth of this home, the reason for Wyatt's success and our family's joy." I leaned in. Thank you to Wyatt's mother, the woman who never stopped believing in her husband and stood behind everything good. Elena! The room erupted. Champagne raised. A spotlight hit Elena's face, glowing like a winter queen. No one looked at me. No one questioned why the real mother sat alone in the shadows. I picked up my napkin, folded it in quarters. I didn't wipe my mouth. I didn't wipe away tears, because there were none. I knew I was being erased from this picture, bit by bit. No declaration, no thunder, just a slow fading, until even I couldn't remember why I was still here. A waiter passed with a silver tray. He leaned down. "Miss Gloria, Miss Elena said if you brought any food trays like last time, the kitchen can reheat them for you." I looked at him, nodded, not in agreement, but in recognition. I had just been mistaken for a server. Inside my bag was a scan of the old house deed, the house they live in now. I pulled out my phone, opened the thread with Jack. No need to say anything else. I'd said enough. That night, I left the party early, while they danced under fairy lights and jingle bells. I called a car. Didn't say goodbye. Through the car window, the lights blurred behind me, and in my mind, one sentence echoed. For the first time in years, I didn't just feel forgotten. I felt dangerous, and I began preparing for a silent escape. One with no farewells, only the truth left behind for those who stayed. By the time they opened the door the next morning, I was already gone, along with every deed, every title, and the mineral rights to the quarry. There was no slammed door, no suitcase dragging loudly across the floor, only the tick-tock of the clock cutting through the stifling silence of the night. 3 a.m., the hour when everything feels more honest than daylight. I sat in the kitchen, hands resting on the cold tabletop, watching the dim green glow of the microwave clock. 3:02. No one was awake. No one needed me to be. I didn't pack much, just one soft leather bag, the only thing I kept from my days as Arthur's wife. Inside, my passport, bank book, a faded photo of my father, and one large envelope holding every house deed, land survey map of the quarry, and Arthur's old handwritten will. For Gloria, if one day she's forgotten. I used to hide it in the lining of a dresser drawer, as if I had to protect the last scrap of my dignity from the gaze of my own children. But now, there was nothing left to hide. I left a small note, folded neatly beside the untouched coffee pot. I'm gone. I don't belong here. I walked out the door like a passing guest. No hesitation. No sighs. Not because I was stronger than yesterday, but because every tear I held back was now watering something else. A new life. Jack's law office in Flagstaff was 2 hours from Scottsdale, but by 7:20 a.m., I was already seated across from him in a burgundy leather chair. He looked older than the last time. Thinner hair, deeper lines, but his eyes were still sharp, almost unsettlingly so. He looked at me like someone who'd just seen a flood survivor, relieved but cautious. I thought you just wanted to transfer the house title, he said. Now you want to activate the quarry rights too? I nodded. Both need to be done this morning, before noon. He leaned back, flipping through the stack I brought. His brow creased when he reached the original property license, a limestone hill Arthur had bought in 1998 on a whim during a hunting trip. Price $25,000. You know what this land's worth now? Jack asked. I shook my head. I just remember Arthur saying it was insurance for my dignity. If one day I had nothing left to hold on to. Jack exhaled. He was right. He didn't ask anything more. We signed the revocation of Wyatt's power of attorney, erasing his name from the house title and joint bank account. Then came the agreement with a local mining company, an initial deposit of $300,000 in exchange for exclusive rights to survey. If viable, they'd purchase full access within 90 days. You sure? Jack asked one last time. I answered by signing. No trembling, no pause. My name, Gloria Matheson, inked bold and certain, like the first time I wrote it after the divorce. Loretta opened the door before I could knock twice. She didn't ask why I'd shown up at 10 a.m. with a dusty suitcase. She just pulled me inside, brewed mint tea, and said one thing. Queen Bee is back. I laughed. It had been years since anyone called me that. My old nickname from the days I wore a crown in Cottonwoods County pageant, holding a mic and singing Patsy Cline's Crazy in a smoky auditorium. Loretta was my piano accompanist back then. Now she ran a bakery down on Main Street, where cinnamon rolls met the lines of time. I stayed in the attic loft above her shop. No one asked if I was okay, and that felt like mercy. No pity. No, Mom, are you all right? Just quiet mornings, the smell of cinnamon, and the ding of a cash register when Loretta sold another apple pie. I quietly withdrew funds from my personal account, inheritance from Arthur, and bought the old souvenir store next to the bakery. The faded wooden sign read, High Desert Gifts. I took it down, repainted it cream white, and hand-lettered a new name, The Second Bloom. A second bloom, not of youth, but of clarity. I spent 2 days cleaning every dusty shelf. Loretta brought over peach preserves to sell. I planted lavender pots by the window, the kind Arthur once grew on our old porch, and smiled when the first customer walked in and asked, Do you sell handmade cards? I nodded. I didn't yet, but I would. I began rediscovering what I'd forgotten. I could draw. I could fold paper. I could pick the perfect silk ribbon for wrapping. And I could greet people with a smile that didn't feel forced, because I had stopped being mother. Now, I was just Beatty, gift shop owner, in a quiet little town, and alive. One quiet weekend morning, I was wiping the front window when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, but I knew. Good morning, Miss Morrison, came a firm, courteous voice. This is Raymond Porter from Arizona Mineral. I'm calling to confirm. The exploration and mining agreement for the West Cottonwood land is finalized. You'll receive the initial $300,000 deposit within 24 hours. I didn't respond right away. My eyes followed the drifting clouds above the hills. My hand tightened slightly on the rag. Thank you, Raymond, I said slowly. And give my regards to Mr. Willis. for being the first to believe I wasn't just a crazy old woman guarding worthless land. I hung up. I didn't cry. I just sat in the shop's wicker chair, opened my journal, and wrote one line. Freedom doesn't come with announcements. That afternoon, I walked down Cottonwood's main street. The sun was warm, but not sharp. A boy sold vanilla ice cream on the corner. I bought 2 cones, one for me, one for Loretta. When I returned, she was knitting behind the counter. "Everything all right?" she asked. I handed her the cone, then placed my phone on the counter. The screen still showed 3 missed calls from Wyatt. I didn't answer, not out of anger, not out of fear, but because I now lived in a place my son could no longer reach, in the middle of freedom. None of them, Wyatt, Elena, knew I'd sold the remaining quarry shares to a subsidiary of a global mining group. They didn't know I was setting up a trust for a retirement home for women artists in the region. And they certainly didn't know I had legally changed my name, back to the one I was born with, Beatty Lark. Lark. Like the bird that sings alone. That night, I sat on the front steps of my shop, listening to the instrumental playing softly from Loretta's old radio. The wind blew through my silver hair. Free now, from weight and worry, I opened my journal and wrote one last line. I stayed silent long enough. They were wrong to mistake softness for weakness. They owe me nothing, and I owe them no more submission. A woman stepped into my shop, looked at the necklace I was wearing, and asked, "Where did you buy that?" I smiled. I didn't buy it. I kept it. After letting go. It was January. Winter had settled into Cottonwood with crisp mornings and a lazy fog curling around the mountains. But inside the second bloom, the scent of cinnamon and sweet orange oil floated through every corner, making winter feel less cruel. I was restocking glass jars for our candle-making workshop when a woman in her 60s walked in. She wore a teal knit coat, a dusty rose scarf wrapped neatly around her neck. She looked around the shop like she'd just stepped into a forgotten memory. Her eyes landed on me. She tilted her head. "That necklace," she said, pointing at the chain around my neck. "I remember that style when I was young. Where'd you get it?" I reached up and gently touched the charm, a faded silver pendant engraved with tiny letters. A.W. "I didn't buy it," I said softly. "I kept it. After letting go." She smiled, asked nothing more, picked out an old picture frame and came to the counter. Before leaving, she whispered, "I wish I'd met you sooner, Bee." I stood still after the door closed behind her, not because I was emotional, because inside, I felt as calm as a lake. Loretta peeked from behind the curtain. "You said it, Queen Bee." By early afternoon, the shop was buzzing. A handful of older women came for the workshop. One had retired from teaching. Another had just finalized her divorce. A few had never made a candle in their life, but laughed like 20-year-olds. "Ms. B," one of them called out, "do you take custom orders? I want to gift my ex-husband a candle that smells like regret." Laughter roared around the table. I laughed too, not like I did in my youth, but without bitterness, no longer twisted by endurance. Loretta leaned over and whispered, "They said, watching you makes them believe women don't have an expiration date." I responded with a knowing blink and continued showing them how to pour wax into molds. Later that day, Loretta pulled me out back. In her hands, a stack of papers and a small mic. "I signed you up," she declared, dropping everything in my lap. "Next week, you're on my podcast. Topic: Mothers who stopped stepping back." I raised an eyebrow, not surprised, just amused. "You planning to make me famous?" "No," she winked. "I plan to make you the sweetest comeback story of 2023. We burst into laughter, our voices tangled in the breeze, and the old radio playing. You make me feel like a natural woman. Loretta hung a small sign outside the shop. Free workshop. Candles from memory. I laughed when I read it. Not because it was cheesy, but because I understood exactly what memory smelled like. Sometimes vanilla sweet, sometimes heavy like burnt wax. But that morning, it was soft lavender and warm ginger, bathed in sunlight pouring through the second bloom. 4 women joined the session, my age or older, silver hair, old wedding bands, eyes with familiar cracks. We didn't speak much at first, just sat around the long table, stirring wax, fragrance oils, and memories. I handed out little wooden spoons etched with "still blooming," a reminder that time doesn't just wear us down. Sometimes it makes us blossom. One woman, Sherry, whispered like soothing herself, "My husband passed last year. I spent my life caring for him. He's gone now, and I still make coffee for 2 every morning." I didn't answer. I just nodded. Not because I lacked comfort to give, but because I knew some grief doesn't need words, just someone who doesn't walk away. As the session ended, Loretta suddenly raised a phone with a clip-on mic. "Beatty will be on my podcast next week," she announced. Topic: Mothers who stop stepping back. I almost laughed in surprise, but instead of declining, I said, "If I get to choose the background music, I'll think about it." The room erupted again. One woman added, "You should do it. Your voice makes people believe they still have a chance." I returned behind the counter, adjusting newly cooled candles. My eyes met the mirror behind the shelf. The reflection was me, but not the woman from last winter. No dark circles, no slumped shoulders ready to break. This woman looked back at me with quiet steadiness. For the first time in years, I recognized myself again. The bell above the door chimed, soft, clear. I looked up. Wyatt stood there. He didn't look like he used to. No swagger, no smug smile, no Elena clinging to his side. Just uncertain eyes and empty hands. "Hi, Mom," he said. I didn't respond right away. I glanced behind him. Elena was outside the car, hesitant, not stepping in. "We heard about the quarry. The lawyer said, 'You own everything now,'" Wyatt said. I nodded. "That's right." "I was wrong, Mom." His voice trembled, not from cold, but because for the first time, he was standing in a room he didn't control. I laid my towel on the counter, looked into the eyes of the boy who once held my hand crossing the street, and the man who once turned away from me at a Christmas table. "You're grown now, Wyatt. You don't owe me an apology, and I don't need one." I saw his eyes flicker to the laptop screen, where first-month sales were clearly displayed, $12,364. Then to the candles etched with my name, the women snapping photos, the music playing. "You make me feel like a natural woman." I wasn't angry, but I wasn't waiting. He stood a moment longer, then turned. The bell chimed again, a gentle period at the end of an old chapter. Loretta emerged from the back. "You okay?" I smiled. "I'm not waiting for them to turn around anymore. I'm moving forward. And this time, I'm not looking back." A week later, I got an email from someone named Camilla Matthews, CEO of a handcrafted gift brand on Etsy. She wrote simply, "Beatty, a traveler told me about your shop. The way you engrave meaning into every item moved me. We'd like to bring the second bloom to Etsy nationally under the category Artisans Reborn. If you're open, we'll start with a trial order of 1,500 candles. Budget's yours to decide." I reread it 3 times. I couldn't believe it. Then I remembered Arthur, standing on that barren limestone land all those years ago. Keep this land, he'd said. One day it might be the insurance for your dignity when they all walk away. Arthur's been gone nearly 11 years, but that sentence stayed, not as a warning, but as a promise. I glanced over at the wooden box on my display shelf. Inside was the silver necklace, etched with 2 letters, AW. A woman in her 50s walked in, sharp eyes, cropped hair. She chose a candle and paused as she looked at me. That necklace, where'd you get it? I smiled. I didn't buy it. I kept it after letting go. That afternoon, Loretta dragged me to the cafe next door. She ordered the 1980 apple crumble, our favorite from back in our town library days. So, ready for the podcast? She grinned. Title saved. Queen Bee and the Art of Quiet Victory. I laughed. Only if I get to pick the soundtrack. Loretta squinted at me. You know, she said, a lot of older women come by just to see you. They say they wish they'd met you sooner. I didn't reply. I just watched the light filtering through amber glass jars, like every forgotten corner inside me had finally found its own glow. That night, I sat alone and opened my old notebook, flipped to the last page, wrote, "They owe me nothing now, but I no longer owe them." My silence. I closed the notebook, placed it in a drawer. The phone vibrated. A call from a number I hadn't changed the name on. Wyatt, my son. I looked at the screen, and I turned it off. Not out of anger, but because I was somewhere he'd never reach again, in the heart of freedom. I used to believe that love meant enduring, meant staying quiet, meant always taking the smaller portion, as long as my children had enough. I lived my whole life that way, until one day, my silence was no longer seen as grace, but as weakness. I remember standing outside the bakery that year, my hands trembling as I watched the son I had raised say, "You've got nothing left to teach anyone." I don't know what hurt more, his words or the truth behind them, that all these years I had taught him his mother didn't deserve respect by sacrificing without boundaries, without conditions, and without ever asking for anything in return. But I eventually learned how to walk again, even if my steps were slower. I learned how to hold myself without waiting for someone else to reach out. I learned to choose the happiness I deserved instead of hoping someone else would hand it to me. And strangely enough, it was only when I stopped begging for love that I began to feel something blooming inside me. I share my story, not to blame anyone, but to remind us, some women spend their entire lives holding a family together, only to forget how to hold themselves. Don't let devotion become the reason others assume you'll always forgive, always stay, always bow your head. Because at some point, you have to stand up, not for revenge, but to stop being disregarded. If you hear these words and see yourself in them, maybe it's time to step away from what's grown too old to hold you. No noise, no arguments, just once. Say, I am a person too, and I am worthy. Take time to care for something. Maybe a small plant on the windowsill, or a journal long buried in dust. Because sometimes, all it takes is tending to something that lives because of you, to remember how to breathe again. If this story moved you, send it to a woman you've seen smile too often, without anyone asking, "Are you really okay?" Maybe that's all she needs to begin her next chapter. Because I once thought I had disappeared. But the truth is, I was just learning how to bloom again. And this time, brighter than ever.